We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights governments are instituted, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of those who suffer from it to refuse allegiance to it, and to insist upon the institution of a new government, laying its foundation on such principles, and organizing its power in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Resolved, that woman is man's equal and was intended to be so by the Creator, and the highest good of the race demands that she should be recognized as such. The strategies of agitation include 6 major stages that can determine the journey of a social movement into a successful proposal for reform or a failed effort that may require adjustments. The women's suffrage movement follows this structure of rhetorical strategy into the victorious ratification of the 19th Amendment. The first stage is petition, in which the initial request for a change is presented to the presiding body. In 1776, Abigail Adams wrote to her husband to remember the ladies. However, it was not until after the American Revolution that the women's suffrage movement began to reveal its demands. Gerrit Smith proposed women's suffrage at a Liberty Party meeting in June 1848, a party who had stemmed out of the abolitionist movement. When the petition is rejected, the focus shifts to serve a change of heart in the next stage of promulgation. This stage encourages membership and support through a variety of tactics where mass communication vessels are utilized. In 1848, the first Women's Rights Convention was held at a church in Seneca Falls, New York, and initiated the women's suffrage movement into the political arena. This convention marked one of the first public expressions of societal reform for the social, civil, and religious condition and the rights of women in the United States. Of the 300 in attendance, only a third signed their support for the Declaration of Sentiments. However, regardless of the humble beginnings, the Seneca Falls Convention is still regarded as the birthplace for women's rights activism. Only 68 women and 32 men signed the declaration, many fearing that associating with this cause may bring hardships upon those who signed. Yet, this sparked political and social controversy over traditional gender roles during that time period. Between 1850 and 1860, the National Women's Rights Convention held 10 meetings around the American Northeast. Both men and women participated in these assemblies. However, the only measurable success was found within their ability to make their message heard and rallying support. Another way to reach a larger group was through the printed media. The Una, first published in 1853, a paper devoted to the elevation of women. The Revolution, first published in 1868, was a series of radical periodicals. Men, their rights and nothing more. Women, their rights and nothing less. In 1870, the first official paper of the National American Women's Suffrage Association, the Woman's Journal. Stage 3. Solidification. This stage is used to unite followers into a stronger force. Plays, songs, art and poetry, slogans, or expressive symbols. The creativity utilized in this stage encompasses a variety of personalities that may be drawn to one or more tactics. It is during solidification that many of these strategies define the movement. The literature and music will resonate for decades after the end of the struggle, breathing life into everyone who experiences it. The National American Women's Suffrage Association sponsored a number of plays that dramatized their cause.
When Nag, the raging stallion, meets a careless man on foot, he will sometimes not destroy him, even if the man don't shoot. But the mare, if he should meet one, makes the bravest cowboy pale, for the female of the species is more deadly than the male.
The slogans of the women's suffrage movement were sharp and simple in order to identify very specific calls to action. Votes for Women became the ultimate slogan that defined this movement. Stage 4. Polarization. This stage insists that a neutral stance would be just as critical as those who oppose the change. Polarization creates a firm line between support and resistance. The women's suffrage movement promoted the importance of women's right to vote, yet they were not given a common adversary until activists pronounced rivaling parties as the enemy. Stage 5. Non-violent resistance. This stage aims to engage in creative disorder, resisting those laws that are deemed unjust through acts of civil disobedience. The ultimate goal of non-violent resistance is to persist until the petition becomes a reality. The women's suffrage movement participated in a number of nonviolent resistance strategies. None were as successful as their marches. In 1911, 3,000 supporters marched in New York City with 70,000 onlookers. In 1912, 20,000 people carried a parade down Fifth Avenue in New York City with over 500,000 spectators. In 1913, 8,000 peaceful supporters marched on Washington, D.C., yet this parade ended with an overwhelming mob by angry observers. Later in the same year, another march on Fifth Avenue brought 10,000 marchers and almost 500,000 bystanders. In 1915, New York City held another parade with 40,000 marchers. The Silent Sentinels were a significant piece of the nonviolent resistance. From January 1917 to June 1919, women picketed day and night outside of the White House. Some onlookers read the signs and passed by, yet others were verbally and even physically abusive. Although none of the attackers were ever arrested, a number of the women were arrested on charges of obstructing traffic. Americans soon became enraged with how the women were being treated, and as a result, support for the movement increased. Despite President Wilson's best attempts, he could not ignore the Sentinels for long. In January 1918, President Wilson finally announced his positive platform on women's suffrage. The final stage is escalation or confrontation. When more moderate tactics have failed to enact change, the movement employs more aggressive devices. Threatened disruption, non-negotiable demands, non-verbal offensiveness. For this time period, many of the confrontational tactics appear composed compared to contemporary standards, yet this last stage initiated the final push to the right for women to vote. As with polarization, the confrontation stage allows the enemy to be personally attacked, but on a much more provoking scale. Many of the protest signs addressed President Wilson specifically. Not only did the slogans gain the attention of the president's staff to quell negative publicity, it also secured the attention of the general public, who would begin to question the president's ability to govern appropriately. The women's suffrage movement recognized the need for insistent and deliberative methods. In 1916, suffragists flew over President Wilson's private yacht and dropped down amendment petitions. In fact, many of the final efforts were specifically aimed at President Wilson. As a continuing measure of nonviolent resistance, the escalation of the Silent Sentinels led to the Watchfire campaign. In December 1918, the Sentinels used an urn in front of the White House to set President Wilson's words ablaze in protest of his hypocrisy. A form of obscene deprecation, the Sentinels intensified the protests, burning President Wilson's photograph in February of 1919. Carrie Chapman Catt reviewed the women's suffrage movement to the passage of the 19th Amendment. To get the word male in effect out of the Constitution cost the women of the country 52 years of pauseless campaign. During that time, they were forced to conduct 56 campaigns of referenda to male voters, 480 campaigns to get legislators to submit suffrage amendments to voters, $277 campaigns to get state party conventions to include women's suffrage planks in party platforms, $47 campaigns to get state constitutional conventions to write women's suffrage into state constitutions, and 19 campaigns with 19 successive Congresses. The 19th Amendment, defined in the U.S. Constitution, is the right of citizens of the United States to vote, shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on the account of sex. Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. In May 1919, the proposal passed the House. In June, it passed the Senate, and the amendment was sent on to the states. On August 26, 1920, the final piece necessary to ratify the amendment passed in Tennessee and became the last of the 36 required states to meet the constitutional requirement. The 19th Amendment was officially added to the U.S. Constitution. The women's suffrage movement followed all 6 of the strategies of agitation, and as a result, the 19th Amendment gave women the public voice they always wanted and deserved. From the first petition, through the promotion and unifying stages of promulgation and solidification, then onto the divisive and aggressive stages of polarization, nonviolent resistance, and the escalation and confrontation stages, this movement actively demonstrated the importance of organized strategies. Too much has already been said and written about women's sphere. Leave women, then, to find their sphere.